Who is allowed to buy and how much?
Adults over the age of 21 are allowed to purchase up to an ounce.
What's the origin of the marijuana?
Comes from state licensed I-502 legal production. The seed to sale system, that means it is a closed system. It is not coming from medical growers, it is not coming from out of state. It is coming from a system that has been tracked very strictly from seed to sale or clone to sale. So it is a closed system. Legal retail cannabis sells legally produced cannabis, and that is very different from medically produced cannabis or black market produced cannabis.
Is there regulation of THC level and quality?
There's no regulation regarding THC level or quality. There are quality testing measures for contaminants, basic food and safety administration type stuff, microbials. Certainly percentages are tested for, but that's, you have a requirement for the THC levels to be displayed, and associated with the product like you would any ingredient label. So far, certainly, since flour is being sold by the gram, that's relatively typical. Joints, packaged joints. There's a very small stream right now of edibles and oils because there are a few processors that actually are approved by the state to actually process oils and edibles right now, but they are finding their way obviously into the stores, and it's the same product that you'll find in medical stores basically. So the question really isn't so much like, is it going to have the kind of split we have in medical stores where at least 30% of the product is extractions, usually much more like 50 to 60%, and a smaller percentage is flour. We'll get there when we get the processors producing the volume to do that. In terms of who's buying it, the people who are buying from retail stores are the people who do not have access to the lower priced options, whether because they never got a medical card or they do not know people in the black market, but they want to buy a couple of grams that they'll consume over the next month or two. Another demographic of folks who are buying it are people who are morally opposed to participating in black market and medical market transactions, and they want to support the legal market. Those people, by definition, also have to have the disposable income to do so, given that prices are usually twice as high for retail. So people with disposable income, i.e. professionals, a lot of the new professionals that are in the tech industry have plenty of money to burn, and it's easy for them to go to a retail shop, so no problem, they'll go get a pack of joints. And also tourists obviously are a huge demographic in terms of consumption. But then there's the new consumers too, the people who wouldn't buy pot before because it was illegal. And that's different from the people who are morally supporting the legal market, because the people who are morally supporting the legal market could buy medical or black market, and historically have, but now that they have the option, they buy legal. This new demographic, these are the new consumers. These are your soccer moms, your grandmothers, your retired people, your veterans, your people who didn't smoke marijuana because it was illegal, basically. Not because they believed it was particularly dangerous necessarily, but now that it's legal, they feel like, okay, it's okay to consume it. So that's certainly an element. And it differs also between rural and urban areas too. So, yeah. Colorado's market got off the ground a year ago. So a lot more has been generated in taxes and revenues from that. Washington State has generated significant sums despite having barely any retail stores open so far. So the revenue is coming in, and more revenue is coming in as the markets develop, in particular as the retail stores open, as more supply becomes available. Then more sales are going to happen and more revenue is going to come in.
How much additional taxes and fees have been earned?
All that data is on the Liquor Control Board website. They update it on a weekly basis. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I'll send you the link along with this video.
Are any of the tax revenues that are coming from
Yes.
cannabis going to prevention
Yes.
and other cannabis?
They are. There's a percentage that are earmarked for education, percentage earmarked for prevention. Again, those numbers are easily accessible from the Liquor Control Board website. I don't have them off the top of my head.
Which measures are used to prevent smuggling cannabis outside of the state?
So you have to understand with I-502 legal cannabis, the word diversion doesn't necessarily mean into or out of state. The word diversion means into or outside of the legal system, which is a closed loop system. So in terms of diversion, internally, those measures are set up by the seed to sale tracking and very strict security measures and video recording that's required by the Washington State Liquor Control Board of cannabis from seed to sale. So that's how it's prevented from diversion outside of the system. There's another good reason not to divert outside the system, which is if you are a legal grower, you can get much better prices for your weed within the legal system. You can sell your pounds for example, approximately $4,000 a pound, as opposed to the black market or the medical market, which are both comparable and approximately between $1,600 and $2,000 a pound. So you would kind of be not very smart to divert out of the system at this point because your prices for your product are much, much higher. Now, in terms of into or out of the state, both Washington and Colorado are actually net importers of cannabis. And they're net importers of cannabis from California in particular, and from Washington from Oregon in particular. So, to be honest, there's really not any sort of worry about diversion out of state right now, because what's happening is, of course, a lot of importing is going on from California in particular again, and also Oregon a little bit.
Is there increased enforcement of border controls?
No, there are not.
It says on which levels smuggling happen. Organized crime, large amounts versus small scale, semi-professional versus consumer tourism.
It ranges, but it's mostly decentralized. Certainly there is larger scale smuggling, but you would have to define that for that to make sense. What is larger scale smuggling? Is it 20 pounds being driven up in a trunk? Or is it, a U-Haul truck full of several thousand pounds? I would argue the latter would be that. But there are far more trunks with 20 pounds in them out there than there are U-Haul trucks with 500 pounds in them. In other words, that there's large-scale smuggling, but there's a whole lot of small-scale smuggling that happens. And in quantity, the small-scale smuggling is much greater, basically.
Any known savings in the cost of law enforcement?
I don't have that information right now.
Which measurable effects occurred in the justice system?
Well, measurably, a bunch of people got let out of jail and also had their cases dismissed immediately upon the passage of I-502. Similar things going on in Oregon as well, where prosecutors are essentially letting marijuana cases off their dockets. And that ranges from really small stuff to actually some pretty big stuff. I had an article come across my eyes, and again, this is an article, secondhand source, so I don't have direct knowledge of it. But there was a case against a Texas man who was caught with a few hundred pounds that he was transporting from Oregon headed to Texas. And the Oregon judge literally delayed the case, specifically by saying, I think I need to take into account the shifting attitudes towards marijuana in this country, and we got to think about this some more. So it has a pretty strong effect on how judges are thinking about the penalties for marijuana infractions that happen before the vote, as well as after. So it's definitely having a significant effect on the criminal justice system already.
So talk a little bit about the effects on tourism.
Well, definitely tourism has been. So the question is a little bit confusing because it's the effects on tourism. Certainly, tourists are a big consumer of recreational legal marijuana in both Washington and Colorado. Colorado has a more developed cannabis tourism industry whereby people come specifically to try out legal cannabis and get tours around to different retail shops and so forth. Washington State has actually Kush Tours, which does that as well. And certainly people are having recreational cannabis tourism going on. It's definitely helping in that sense, and it's certainly something that tourists are spending their dollars on. Now, what's interesting, besides the recreational tourism side of it, is the medical tourism aspect of it, which is people coming in from out of state to buy legal cannabis for medical reasons. Usually they come into the state to buy cannabis for medical reasons, and they get a card or they get hooked up. But now that there's recreational, some of that is going to go directly to the recreational stores. But certainly, the tourism has been, I think, one of the main drivers of actually legal market consumption, given that the prices are much higher than medical. And locals know how to get the medical or black market, but the tourists don't. So the people who are buying $40 grams of cannabis as opposed to $10 grams of cannabis, a significant percentage of those are, in fact, people from out of town or out of state.
Let's move on to first experiences. What unexpected problems have occurred?
I think the slowness of the implementation was not expected. I think that the pace at which our Liquor Control Board is approving businesses, legal cannabis businesses, is very, very slow. Because it is, again, a closed system that they're creating from scratch. And they've chosen to go very, very slowly in order to make sure that that system is being created on a firm, strong foundation. But what they have not anticipated, the Liquor Control Board didn't really understand the relationship between the canopy they approve and the actual product they're going to get and when. So the Liquor Control Board approved a quantity of cannabis being produced that they thought would translate into a certain amount of retail product. They did not understand cannabis agriculture, so what they didn't understand was that it takes at least 12 weeks from the time of approval to when people are actually producing on the one hand. They did not understand that people don't use all of the canopy that they have for blooming. If you're indoor, part of it is for vegging, part of it is for propagation, and part of it is for blooming. So when you approve 1,400 square feet of canopy, what you're really approving is about 400 square feet of flowering canopy if it's indoor. If it's outdoor, you're approving, pretty much people use the whole canopy that they're allotted. A Tier 3 outdoor is 21,000 square feet. But the issue with that is that there's only a couple of times a year when they harvest. So in terms of anticipating how much product will be available in retail stores, the Liquor Control Board did not understand cannabis agriculture. Therefore, we have supply chain problems that are very slowly easing up. I attribute that to policymakers simply not understanding how cannabis markets work. And so that's what's unexpected, I think, is that the Liquor Control Board was expected to know everything, to find to be able to understand how to create the process and fine tune it. And quite frankly, I'm not the one who's surprised, but the rest of the state is surprised, basically, by this. And the problems that are cropping up because of how slow it's being implemented that are partly intentional and partly unintentional.
Looks like they're looking for information regarding surveys, pro or con, before and after the vote, and then they're wanting to know any other changes in mind. Is there an opposition?
Okay, so let me answer that with the information that I do have and that we do have, because we have been studying the pace of implementation. So voters voted for it differently in different counties and different jurisdictions. But what they voted for, was legal cannabis. There's a vote against the drug war, basically. There's a vote to have a different approach to regulating cannabis in society. Now, for the voters, all they knew is they were voting for something that would presumably, lower law enforcement costs and ease all sorts of burdens on society to produce revenue. They did not vote for a particular system of implementation. They did not vote for a system of production. They did not vote for the rules that are actually the reality of legal cannabis. So the problem is that you have voters that may be pro-cannabis. They may consume cannabis themselves, but they don't want producers in their own neighborhoods. They don't want them in their backyards. So the problem right now is not so much an anti-cannabis thing, although there's certainly that, and a lot of the organized opposition is based on fear of cannabis and prohibitionary attitudes. But the problem right now is, where can people produce cannabis? Because they can get an approval from the Liquor Control Board to produce it, but then they go and start to actually do it in their neighborhood or in their rural residential property. And then what we're finding is increased opposition to the location of production facilities in these anti-groups' backyards, basically. And the anti-groups are largely, culturally against cannabis, but they are joined by city council people who don't see revenue coming to them. They see revenue going to the state. They want revenue, so basically they enact a moratorium. And it's part of a bigger game to force the state to share revenue. And it has nothing to do with cannabis. So that's one side of it, and the other side is the organized NIMBYism, not in my backyard, that is happening throughout the state. Production is getting zoned out of all but the largest agricultural areas, and that's shaping the kind of cannabis production that can happen significantly.
Are there new problems around the shops?
So the new retail shops are encountering problems. They're not new problems necessarily. They're problems associated with rolling out a legal system in the context of regulations that make it very difficult to locate anywhere. There are very strict zoning rules around where cannabis businesses can be located, and it's very hard to find a location that complies with those rules and have a landlord that is friendly to a cannabis business who is willing to take the risk of federal intervention to be part of it. So that is an ongoing problem. It didn't change with the actual approval of the businesses, which has only been happening in the last 6 months roughly. At the same time, there are retail shops that face local opposition that's not dissimilar to the ones that are facing producers. There's Uncle Ike's in Seattle is facing an ongoing protest and possible litigation from a church that is located nearby, an African American church, from their location. So there's that is a new thing, right? Because once they pop up and then suddenly, well, this is zoned properly, but the church down the street doesn't like it. And so that creates difficulties. But they're staying open nonetheless. There appears to be no basis for litigation. It's a problem for them to have a group of people protesting their business, but there's kind of a limit to how long that's going to go on.
Where does this change in drug policy come from?
Well, primarily the legalization issues come from a fundamental understanding that's finally reached the populace that a punitive approach to illegal drug regulation will never work. It has never worked. It has only created more of the problem that it attempts to actually deal with, because it creates risk premiums that create incentives for people to participate in the black market. And that the drug war is a war on people of color. It's a war on mothers. It's a war on children. It's a war on society. It's a civil war, and we're sick of it. We are tired, sick to death of trying to make war on our own people. And voters understand this. And what they voted for was not for more cannabis. We have to disabuse ourselves of the notions that actually legalization initiatives are about cannabis. They're about ending a failed approach to a public health issue. So in the future, the assumption is that we will deal with this in a public health fashion, where people in lab coats instead of people with guns are making the policy and regulating it. So in the long run, what this is an anti-war move at its root.
Is there still a legal street market, and is there still a legal production market?
Absolutely there is. Why would it go away overnight? Cannabis is federally illegal and it's globally illegal. Until those situations change, there will always be black market cannabis. The prohibition approach creates the black market. The prohibition approach did not disappear when we legalized cannabis. It's still there. It's still there nationwide. Still there at the local level. Creating a system that is a closed system takes a long time, and people have to want to buy legal cannabis. And why would they buy legal cannabis when legal cannabis means inferior product and much more expensive product, which is the case right now and will be the case for the next year and change. And similar things are going on in Colorado. One thing people really have to stop thinking is that just because you legalize cannabis in one state, therefore you're going to get rid of the black market. It's a very simplistic, delusion that I don't know where it comes from. I believe it comes from a fundamental lack of understanding about how agriculture works, and also how policy works. I think that one of the great things about this great experiment in legalizing cannabis is that it's teaching people the things they should have learned in elementary school about economics and about government. I think that people have this idea that you wave a magic wand, you pass a law, the president says something, and then suddenly everything is different. And this is this is how they feel about everything, not just legal cannabis, because they don't actually understand how it works. They don't have to understand how it works. It doesn't touch their lives. And I think that this is a great practice in helping people actually understand how complex reality is, and that if you don't get something right away, that doesn't mean it's a failure, that there is such a thing as a long-term strategy. And I would offer, for example, that when our legal system is producing enough cannabis to drive prices down and have high quality, that's when you'll see a lot of black market consumption shift to legal consumption. In the meantime, a lot of black market producers are now legal producers. So the black market is being absorbed into the legal market because the legal market needs their expertise. It needs their know-how. It needs their genetics. It needs the black market. The black market cannot go away because the legal market needs it badly. It will continue to need it for quite some time. And so setting up an opposition between the black market and the legal market is, I think, delusional. I think that you have to understand that cannabis comes from somewhere, and that the process for suddenly stopping, cannabis from coming somewhere is a long, drawn-out economic, political, and cultural process. Anywhere that legalizes, you will still have a black market, and you shouldn't be mad at it because that's where the legal market comes from. And a lot of the legal market job expertise that is absolutely necessary for a lot of the black market expertise is necessary for legal market expertise. It's going to need to come in. At the same time, in the long run, this whole thing will happen a lot faster if we create pathways for black market producers to come in to the legal market and to make it easier for them instead of making it harder for them. Because if they can't grow legally, they will grow illegally. Their markets are not just local, but potentially they're national. Potentially they're global. There's no reason for someone who knows how to grow good cannabis but finds it too expensive to be part of the legal process to stop growing cannabis. It's their livelihood. Why would they stop doing something just because something else is going on. It's important to have an adult understanding, an informed understanding of how reality works in order to make good policy. And the expectation that the black market will go away now is, I think, a childish one. And I think we have to grow up about that.
So what is happening to the professional criminals, the semi-professional and low-level ones that occupy the cannabis business?
Many of them are in business now as legal producers. Many of them are in business now as legal service providers. Many of them now have legitimate income where they can pay taxes and be a part of society. This is a huge benefit to society. Now, not enough of them have been given a path because it is a difficult and expensive path to become a legal producer. So in the meantime, they're continuing to, the ones that are not able to actually haven't found that path of legitimacy, are going to do what they always did. There's no effect on them whatsoever. Security expenses, there are certainly much higher security expenses that go into the cost of production. The way it's delivered, the way it's stored, the way you have to have an 8-foot fence around your production facility, the way you have to install, video cameras that cover every inch of space for any cannabis transaction that can be subpoenaed at any time for the past 30 days activity. So it's much more expensive to produce recreational cannabis because of the security measures that have to be taken.
What about the federal level? What about criteria from the federal level? Are they measured by
the Cole memo? The Cole memo. So our entire rulemaking system was designed in direct response to the Cole 2 memo. So every bullet point on that memo is why we're doing what we're doing, how we're doing it. Our legal market, again, is a closed system, seed to sale tracking, only sell to people over 21. The revenue goes to prevention. So it's all designed to meet those federal guidelines. I would add that with the addition of Oregon and Alaska and Washington, D.C. as legal cannabis jurisdictions, what just happened there was it made it a whole lot harder for the feds to come down on any one state or place. As more legal states actually join this process, I think the fear of federal intervention is going to go away because of the sheer scale and magnitude of the kind of pushback the feds would have to shut it all down. The genie is out of the bottle, and it's not going away. At the same time, with respect to meeting those federal guidelines, Colorado technically was meeting those guidelines because they had a regulated medical system before they had a regulated legal system. And so they were able to incorporate their medical system into their legal system. And on paper, it meets all the guidelines. But in practice, Colorado is probably just as poorly regulated as Washington is. The difference is entirely political theater. In Washington, we do have a much more strict system that absolutely is less likely to intersect with the black market. And that's the problem, of course, again, is one of people paying attention to the letter of the law and the letter of the rules as opposed to the actual process of it. And what the feds require is an appearance of adherence to these rules, to the Cole memo rules, because how are they going to enforce that? The states have to enforce it, and they don't have the resources to enforce those regulations. They just simply don't have those resources. So, as with a lot of law, policy has to make up for the utopianism of the law itself. And I would argue the Cole memo as a certain kind of policy that has the effect of federal law. This is also the case. The appearance matters quite a lot. And of course, that's what you would expect in a post-industrial capitalist society when appearance is really everything. Marketing is everything, advertising is everything. In a practical way, policymakers really have to play, a game of weird theater in which they're asserting they're doing things that they're totally incapable of doing and not able to actually enforce. Liquor Control Board does not have the human resources really to hardly even keep up with the kinds of audits it's supposed to be doing for analytical testing, for production, for processing. Certainly in Colorado they can't keep up. The reality is again different from the legality. That has always been the case. But the effort is a first step towards making the legality and the reality match. And it's better because it's closer to a match. And someday we'll get to the point where the legality and the policy match with the actual reality. And we are years off from that, if not decades.
Let's move on to driving under the influence. Was there a special training for law enforcement?
There definitely is. There's more training necessary. There are new things that law enforcement are required to do. If you are law enforcement in the state of Washington, the smell of cannabis in your car is not probable cause to search your car, for example. It may be an indication that the officer might take to do a field sobriety test. And officers have to know when and how far they can take that in terms of the actual measuring of metabolites in one system that requires a blood draw. And officers are not permitted to do field blood draws at the moment that I know of. So people have to be processed and taken in and then have their blood taken. Right now, we don't have much information on increases in DUI, green DUIs, marijuana DUIs, driving under the influences. And there's no information, I assume, because there really hasn't been an uptick in them, because I believe that there definitely would have been news about it if there had been by now. So a lot of the fear around it doesn't seem to be supported. But officers have a new set of things they have to deal with and understand that they didn't have before. So it definitely requires new training for officers. It requires a different approach. And the initiative basically recriminalized, smoking in public, smoking cannabis in public. The city of Seattle, for the last 10 years, has had that as the lowest priority, enforcement priority. Their officers were told for 10 years, don't enforce this. And now they're being told, you have to enforce this. So, it's definitely problematic for police officers to keep up with what it is they're actually supposed to be doing in terms of enforcing the law.
So, in terms of rules that applied to DUI before and after legalization,
we have a per se DUI limit of active THC metabolites in one system, and that's 0.05, I believe. It's a very low level. And again, given that there are a lot more people worried about what would happen after that, and it's been 2 years since adults were legally allowed to possess an ounce of cannabis and consume it in the privacy of their home, and there have been no news stories or any information really coming out regarding that being, a problem, a social problem that we have to deal with right now. That's not to say it won't, but so far so good, basically.
Let's ask: are there surveys about change in consumption of minors below 21?
For Colorado, there are surveys out about that. There's been a few news pieces about that, but not for Washington yet. So I don't have those particular news pieces at my fingertips, so I can't really answer that question directly myself.
Do you assume a coming raise or decline in consumption of minors?
I don't think we have enough data really to predict that. I assume rising consumption in general in the population. For minors, that means actually often the opposite, though, because if older people are consuming more, it does not mean the younger people are consuming more. In fact, they will undoubtedly be trying to do something different than the old people. So I don't actually anticipate cannabis becoming a more desirable commodity to consume. I actually think that with adults and older people consuming it, that will make it less cool. For if there were any youth that were actually consuming it to distinguish themselves from the grown-ups, they will be less inclined to do so by smoking cannabis.
How does prevention look after legalization? Was there a change due to the legalization?
Again, there's really not enough data yet about that. I do anticipate increased consumption, especially amongst older people. But we don't have the data yet for Washington State. Colorado is a different story, and I'm not your Colorado expert. However, a quick Google search might yield some studies.
In which way is the protection of youth implemented, tested, and measured? What are the results?
Okay, I don't know. I don't know. It's not a big concern of mine.
Which effect on the medical marijuana market has been observed?
There's been no effect on the medical marijuana market in terms of the actual economics of it. With prices as high as they are, really, it's not taking consumers away from the medical market. It won't for a little while until prices come down.